Thank you so much for joining us at the 2021 Folk Film Gathering. It's our great pleasure to be here with you all again and to kick off with this fantastic conversation between two amazing musicians. Just a quick word about our program this year, which is, of course, all online. We have a fantastic series of films, many of which are very rare, from all around the world, from the Canadian Arctic to Brazil to Belfast and Ireland. Please do check out our program. It's all streaming. Most of the films are available right the way through the next week. So if you buy a festival pass, you can watch all of them but one at whatever point you want during the week. We also have a really fantastic series of events for you throughout the week, kicking off with tonight's concert. But we also have a series of conversations between filmmakers in different parts of the world, exploring what they may have in common. And that kind of reflects our theme this year of solidarity and conversation, where we're inviting not only filmmakers but musicians to join each other in conversation and explore both differences and resonances in their experience. So thank you very much for joining us. I do hope you'll check out some of the other events that we have on over the course of the week. And it's my pleasure now to hand you over to your host for this evening, the Traditional Music Forum's David Francis. Thank you, David.
Thanks, Jamie, and good evening, everybody. Delighted to be hosting this very first event at this year's Folk Film Gathering, online again, unfortunately, but fortunately also in some ways, because this conversation probably wouldn't have happened if we'd been face to face. So I'm delighted to introduce over in Wicklow, in County Wicklow in Ireland, we have Brían Mac Gloinn. Brían is one half of a duo, Ye Vagabonds, who've been really making waves in the music scene and the folk music scene in particular in this last wee while. And also in Glasgow, Alasdair Roberts. Alasdair is a singer and a songwriter and an interpreter of traditional song, and a noted collaborator. He's worked with a whole range of different musicians over the years. And we're going to get some songs from Brían and Alasdair at some point, but a little bit of chat first. And I was struck by, if you get a chance to have a look at Brían's blog, he talks there about the concept of drawing from the well, and I wanted to ask both of them in their artistic practice, in their musical practice, something about their relationship to traditional song in particular. Maybe start off with Alasdair.
Okay, hi. Yeah, well, I suppose my kind of introduction to traditional song and music probably came from my father, really. He was a musician and also worked as a booking agent in Germany, along with my mother. They had a booking agency together in Germany in the 70s, and they booked a lot of Scottish and Irish and some English groups and musicians, mostly kind of folk groups like Battlefield Band and Silly Wizard and the Tanhill Weavers. And but when I was born in the late 70s, and then so I was growing up in the 80s, by which point my father wasn't working in music anymore, because he needed a more lucrative career, having 3 children to look after. So we were living back in Scotland, and so he wasn't so actively involved in the folk scene or the music scene, but he would still play at the weekends, and we'd play together. You know, he played guitar and banjo and accordion, and I had other kind of instruments around the house. So, but when I first started getting into music more seriously in my kind of teens, at first I wasn't really engaging with tradition or folk songs so much. I was writing songs, but I suppose I was more kind of inspired by or interested in a lot of kind of like what I would have thought of as kind of underground or sort of underground rock and so on, from mostly American kind of independent labels were putting out, including the label Drag City that I came to work with through an encounter with Will Oldham, Bonnie Prince Billy, who's also taking part in this festival. But then, I suppose later, maybe in my kind of later teens and early 20s, I began kind of exploring traditional song more. Maybe firstly through kind of my father's record collection. He had all the bands I mentioned before, and then also people like Nick Jones, the great English singer and guitarist, who was a big kind of early influence on me. And then from there, just kind of digging deeper into like archive recordings and so on. The recordings from the School of Scottish Studies and the topic records and things like that. And I gradually came to feel like I could. I developed the confidence to feel like I was able to maybe have a go at singing some of these songs myself. At first I was wary of the kind of term of folk singer, so I used to kind of try and avoid that classification because I felt like I don't know, a variety of reasons, but I felt like it was something that had to be earned, and I feel like now after over 20 years of working with traditional song, I feel more comfortable now to call myself a folk musician.
What about you, Brían? I know that you had a strong family background in music as well.
Yeah, I guess so. I mean, I kind of came to it in a similar way as Alasdair did, I think, in a way. I would have grown up, like I had 3 older sisters and a brother, and they were always playing. My 3 sisters, they all played. And yeah, it'd be tunes, like kind of fiddle, flute, and concertina. There was a trio of them. And Carlow isn't it's not the best known place for music where I grew up. But I suppose we were still surrounded by enough music growing up to kind of have a bit of traditional music. But I definitely didn't. I played it and I was into it, but it wasn't it was kind of something that I shied away from, I think, in my teens. It seemed more interesting to get into like American music, and that kind of, I guess, yeah, when I was a kid, I would have been listening to anything that my parents had, like what else, the same record collection, more or less, I think. But I would have been listening to all that stuff, and then Sweeney's Men was kind of the biggest turning point for me. That was like, because I was getting into like 70s rock and Led Zeppelin and stuff, and then I discovered Sweeney's Men, and that was kind of the point that I realized, people did this in Ireland as well. They had their own kind of rock and roll here. And but yeah, from there on, I got into traditional music, both Irish traditional music as well as like American music through the New Lost City Ramblers, and like into old time American traditional music. And then, yeah, I suppose I didn't really come back to Irish music then until I moved to Dublin, until I was like 18 or 19 or something like that. Started singing songs in pubs in Dublin and realizing that the context made more sense there. I think that it didn't have to be, I think in Ireland, maybe traditional music is often associated with republicanism, as is the language, as is the sport and stuff. And so, I maybe shied away from it for that reason, because, growing up. But then in Dublin, it made a different kind of sense. The context was so different. I mean, Alasdair, you've been around, the crack in Dublin. It's very open,
Yeah. I really like visiting Dublin and playing there and singing. I always felt very welcome there somehow.
It's a good community there, it's a very open community, and it's an unusual one. I think it's completely intergenerational, and the singing community and the kind of music community there, and it's very open. There's just there are little pockets of places that you can just walk into, and I was reading something that Jamie wrote earlier about folk cinema and those kind of ideas of folk and what that means, and that was mentioned as one of those things, and I guess it makes sense to me. It was this music that took place in these kind of open door spaces. Anyone could walk in. You didn't need to buy a drink or pay in. You could just be there, which is cool. It's an amazing community there,
Yeah.
So do either of you, when it comes to traditional song, do you feel any kind of obligation to reproduce what's gone before? I know, Brían, that you've done recordings, or you've collected recordings from Aaron Moore over there on the northwest coast, and you know, do you feel any kind of urge to try and replicate what you hear in those recordings, or is it more a matter of interpretation?
Definitely not replication. You know, it's more so reconstruction or some kind of taking an impression, more I think. But I mean, I think you can try replicate maybe if you want. I wouldn't. It wouldn't be my way of doing it, but you can try. Some people would. I've got friends who really do try and replicate the singers that they hear, the players that they've heard, knowing that they'll never be able to achieve that, and that all that will come out is just themselves anyway. And I think that's true, you know. But more so with the singing and stuff that I would have heard, that I would hear around Aaron Moore, say, or would have heard over the past few years. It's more a case of taking in the overall energy of it, you know, the just how it feels, and trying to get into that feeling. I think there's something about those spaces, like there are these very strong singing communities in parts of Ireland, up in Donegal in Inishowen as well, and in other places. And when you're in those spaces and when you're in those sessions, say when people are sharing songs together, there is a sense of devotion that I think comes up nearly, that I get this feeling of, like, you know, you could be somewhere for a few days, for 2 or 3 days, just singing songs, and it's this kind of egoless space where the, like, people dissolve away, and you just you know, you're listening to long ballad after long ballad. Obviously it probably does something weird to your head, like, but, it creates this space that I think is very, very interesting. It's like outside of the normal, and yeah, people who are very devoted to that music and song.
Yeah, but you draw on traditional song quite a bit, Alasdair, for the language of your songs, and maybe even sometimes the structure of your songs.
Yeah, I think I relate to traditional material in various ways. You know, sometimes it is an interpretation. Yeah, not replication. Like, I feel like if I'm listening to older singers whom I admire, I wouldn't want to replicate them. That doesn't seem very fruitful somehow. But you can definitely learn from them and kind of absorb and kind of assimilate aspects of their approach or their style or their energy or attitude. But you wouldn't want to rip them off, you know. But I think it's important to inform your approach by kind of study, not in the kind of academic sense, but just in the kind of sense of absorbing and osmosis, and listening widely. But yeah, I mean, as well as interpreting traditional songs, I you know, my own writing is often quite heavily influenced by traditional song in various ways. You know, lyrically, maybe thematically, and melodically as well, and so kind of symbologically, maybe that's a word for it. You know, in terms of the stock of symbols used and so on. It's kind of maybe an attempt to paradoxically locate the music both inside and outside of a tradition, in a way to kind of reference tradition, but also to kind of further the tradition, or the sense of what a tradition could be. You know, to keep it alive. I feel grateful that I'm able to do that, because, in a sense, a lot of the important work of preservation has been done, you know, from the sort of, well, from earlier, but from the sort of mid 20th century, with, you know, Hamish Henderson and people like that, you know, actively recording a lot of this important material before it dies out.
You know what I find interesting about that as well, Alasdair, maybe you'd agree, but that those songs only ever existed like that at that particular moment that they were recorded by those people, you know. Yeah, they were just kind of frozen in time. I think it's cool that your writing does, that you're thinking of it that way, because it is kind of ever changing, isn't it? That's why I wouldn't be comfortable even replicating what I hear as well. It's like you kind of have to let things go and morph into whatever they morph into, I think, don't you? It's kind of
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I kind of feel like even though I kind of, what's the word, like tinker with tradition or something, I feel like a sense of having to do it with the utmost respect, you know. Um, like maybe I've not always achieved that, but it's kind of always been at the back of my mind, you know.
There's a kind of interesting sort of unexpected frontier in your music, Alasdair, in particular, sort of frontier between tradition and the avant-garde, and is that part of that idea about just sort of seeing how far you can push it, how far you can make it go.
Yeah, I suppose so. I mean, in terms of sometimes I kind of feel like the spirit that I find in a lot of traditional song and music, you know, has some affinity with kind of avant-garde musics in a way, and then, you know, but I think other musicians have recognised this in the past. I think of someone like the American musician and kind of theorist Henry Flint, who kind of was who moved to New York in the 60s and was kind of trying to get involved in the avant-garde scene there and Fluxus and all that kind of stuff that was happening at the time. But then kind of rejected it and moved back to the mountains of North Carolina and began playing what he called his avant-garde hillbilly music. And there's a big essay that he wrote about this, about the process that he came to kind of arriving at this musical conclusion. So yeah, maybe it's something like that. But then it's also, I've always been interested in this idea, or not always, but probably for the last 15 years or so, been interested in this idea of syncretism, particularly in art, and this idea of, you know, things that are kind of on the surface mutually exclusive or even antagonistic, kind of coexisting and finding a way to coexist within a piece of work. You know, like I think of a record as a kind of syncretic artifact, in that it brings together different kind of strands of influence and different kind of musicians as well. Like I'll bring different players together whose approaches might seem to some to be in conflict, but then trying that through kind of the process of syncretism and they're kind of working against each other, you kind of create something kind of new and raw and unprecedented that kind of discovers itself in the making.
cool. Did you know that Woody Guthrie wrote a letter to what's his name, John Cage?
Oh yeah, no, I didn't know that.
He was a big fan, and I never even considered that they were around at the same time, but of course they were. And he wrote a letter to him, a really detailed letter, because he'd heard some of his pieces performed, and including like some of the like really experimental stuff, you know, like the 422-esque kind of things. But particularly his prepared piano music, he was really inspired by and deeply moved by. And he had a lot to say about how he thought that music was really like relevant to what he had done, you know, which was cool.
Yeah,
I played a gig once in Dublin that was it was about that letter. It was the concept of the gig was John Cage and Woody Guthrie's music being played on the same stage in the one night, kind of, and a bunch of folk musicians playing John Cage's music and a bunch of contemporary avant-garde musicians playing Woody Guthrie music. It was mad, but it was great crack.
Yeah, that sounds cool. I've also seen a photo of John Cage with Joe Heaney. Those two men together. Like I think that Joe Heaney might have featured on a piece that Cage made about Finnegan's Wake. I'm not familiar with the Cage piece, but I've definitely seen a photo of Cage and Joe Heaney together. That would have been an interesting conversation.
Yeah. Yeah, it's just amazing to think of those people in the same world, in the same room, and like, you know.
Yeah.
That's crazy.
But I wonder if it was when was Joe Haney not living and working in New York as a
Yeah,
hotel doorman for a while. Maybe
yeah,
maybe that's how Cage first met him or something.
yeah, I guess, and like yeah, even Leadbelly was around, like hanging around New York for a while at that time as well, and like it was, he was mixing with Irish singers, and he was like
Yeah.
some mad little mixes going on around that time in New York.
Oh yeah, yeah. I heard about that on I think Ian Lynch has this
Yeah, yeah,
podcast.
yeah.
Was talking about that song, the
I'm
Dreamin' Don Dealish.
Yeah, it's
Yeah,
amazing.
how that
All the
became a
way
Lead Belly song.
yeah.
That might be a good cue for us for a couple of songs, maybe one from each of you, for that mention of Woody Guthrie there.
Yeah.
Who wants to go? Who wants to go first? I see, Brían, your guitar is just handy there behind you, so maybe.
Yeah. I'm surrounded. You can't see the floor, but I'm surrounded by instruments here. But yeah, I might actually sing something. I just need to figure out what key it is that it's in. But the just talking about New York and that kind of era of emigration. Yeah, there's a song that I might sing. It's I'll turn on original sound, see if it gets any better for you. This is a song that I learned from a singer that I know from Inishowen up in Donegal. I would have heard it first from my friend Andreas Schulz, who's this amazing singer who lives in Berlin. He's a German man who is very much part of kind of the Donegal singing tradition now. And he's an incredible singer and an amazing guy. But it's a song called Castle Gardens. It's a song about immigration and people leaving Inishowen. And Castle Gardens was the first immigration port that was opened in America. It was in Manhattan. What's the Battery Park is basically where it is now, you might have picked up a car rental there or something now. It's kind of like a very built up place. But anyway, Castle Gardens is called, so I might sing that. I think I sing it in G or F or something like Attention pay, my countrymen, and friends both one and all. My lot lies in America to either rise or fall. From my cabin I was evicted, and then compelled to go. I and leave our sainted Ireland, where the green shamrocks grow. Now I owe the landlord 2 years' rent. I wish I owed him more. The day the bloomin' bailiff nailed a notice on our door. My weak and aged mother, it grieved her sore to go. I and leave the house my father built some 60 years ago. Now she lingered for a little while, she fretted and she died, but the only consolation, she sleeps at father's side. By night and day for them I pray, no matter where I roam, till I return to Ireland across the raging foam. For it's hard to part with those you love, when in your heart you know that you leave the sod
your father trod some 60 years ago. Now if I get to America and God spares me my health, if fortune ever favours me, I'll be a man of wealth. I'll save up all my money and back home to her I'll go, and together we'll live happily where the green shamrocks grow. So hurrah, my boys, the sails are set and the winds are blowing fair. We'll sail for Castle Gardens, in a few days we'll be there, with a bunch of bloomin' shamrocks, St. Patrick blessed of yore. There'll be welcome in America, with friends from Inishawn. Thanks very much.
Thanks, Brían. Do you want to converse with that one, Alasdair? With one of your own?
Yeah, I'll sing one of my own songs. This is a song called Scarce of Fishing. Just on those themes of, leaving and old things falling apart. So scarce of fishing, unfinished mission, forsaken heart, so many striving beyond all wishing to force a living from the broken the harbour women, their breasts are bearing, each woman wearing her mother's skin, for lovers leaving on the tide a seething, and each one grieving abandoned kin. I hear one call on a breeze unceasing to coax an ember to leaping flame below the fallen beams of the home we're leaving, and open up an untold store of pain. The harbour women, their breasts are bearing, each woman wearing her mother's skin, for lovers leaving on the tide are seething, and each one grieving abandoned kin. Thank you.
It's a really nice song, Alasdair.
Thanks. As was yours.
Where were you imagining when you had that song going on? Had you a particular harbour in mind or a particular place?
No, just a kind of general west coast of Scotland vibe.
Yeah. Nice.
North of here, but yeah, north and west of here. I'm in Glasgow.
Yeah, I was thinking that there's a kind of timeless aspect to that, by which I mean that, you know, it's not particular. It's a situation that could have occurred at any time. You know, it's not fixed in a particular time. But Brían, your song did have a particular was related to a particular moment in history, and I was wondering if do you think about contemporary resonance when you're choosing your songs, or does that matter? Is it just the song that's important for its own sake?
I think with that song, say in particular, Castle Gardens, it's a song about people going to the first immigration center, where they were being, you know, there were millions of people went through that place, and some people might have gotten, you know, their names changed, or they got sent somewhere else, or whatever, immigration control and all that kind of stuff going on. I guess that's a song about migrants, isn't it? And it's a song about people who are seeking a better life elsewhere and whatever was going on. I think that's definitely got a huge amount of contemporary resonance. I think any of the songs of migration, particularly from, I think, if I'm singing outside of Ireland, I think it's important, especially in America. I think that's a narrative that you have to kind of continually remind people of, maybe just the fact that the things weren't always that nice in Ireland, and a lot of Irish people had a pretty rough time getting over and being refugees in a place, and, you know, getting treated badly. So that's I think an important one. But there are plenty of songs that have contemporary resonances. But a lot of them, I mean, I think at the moment, the songs that I'm singing, I would say a lot of the most recent songs have been picking up. I'm not that concerned about how relevant they are to today, really. Not at the moment, anyway. Maybe I will as soon as I start performing them. That's something as well, you know.
Yeah.
What do you think?
I kind of feel like with the songs that I write myself, like Dave said, timeless. Yeah, I think I try often to go for a kind of universality. Like I might in the back of my mind have some very specific event or place or person in my mind, but then I try in the writing to kind of to go for something that the listener can enter into and relate to, and so I'm trying to bring it as close to a sort of universality as possible. But then, you know, on the other hand, I also kind of sometimes like writing in a very specific way, but yeah, the universality is a big aspect of it for me, and I suppose it's also I know something about the kind of almost like archetypal nature of some of the big ballads, the muckle sangs, that kind of drew me to them in the first place. They felt just so like eternally relevant to the human condition, the human situation. Not all of the ballads, but many of them.
Yeah.
You know.
I think that's a really nice way to think about, well, just the idea of universality and making songs accessible to people is such a nice thing to keep in mind, because I think that is one thing that you have to consider, isn't it? I mean, there are some songs that I sing that I know that I never perform because they're so archaic that, you know, people aren't going to connect with them, or the meaning might not be as clear, maybe, you know.
Yeah, it just actually occurred to me there that the song that I sang, "Scares of Fishing," the first version of it actually appeared on a compilation to raise money for a refugee charity.
No way.
That must have obviously been in the back of my mind, that as this does have this kind of contemporary relevance.
That's cool.
Yeah, and they can often be something, the specific can carry a universality, because, for example, that, Brían's song is a particular kind of cultural inflection of a very universal situation, because it wasn't only Ireland that suffered mass migration. It's something that happens all over the world. So I think sometimes folk music gets a bit of a bad rap in that respect, because people can't see beyond the specifics to the universal elements of it.
Mm-hmm. Maybe in a way that's down to the delivery or something. That a certain performer, you could have two different singers. Let's take that. I won't use the word performer because not all singers think of themselves as performers, but you could have two different singers singing the same song, and one could deliver it in a way that allows listeners to enter in and relate to it more than another singer could.
Yeah, it's very. That's a very important part of the process, isn't it? Like I think there's this. Sometimes there can be this moment that I experience when I'm singing, say, one of those big songs like the big ballads, that you can enter into a state of like flow where you kind of forget about yourself and the story. To me, it's almost like watching a film. You can kind of just see it moving from left to right and experience the whole story. And it happens with, like, I think silence is an ingredient in that in that thing, maybe, that like it adds intensity to it or something. Maybe space and time, like, having the time to actually hear it and stuff. What do you think?
Yeah, you mean silence as in even like this the use of silence in the singing, sort of between the lines and between the words.
Yeah, and in the room, that like for a song to completely occupy a room,
Yeah.
that room needs to be silent. But definitely, but then there are times when a word can last a very long time,
Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's interesting.
It's interesting how you could be in a pub where it's very noisy. There's a session going on, people are playing tunes, and then suddenly the tunes stop and someone starts singing, and the whole place just goes silent, and everyone just listens. It's something about the human voice and someone narrating a song like that is very kind of captivating.
Well, it's such basic, brilliant entertainment, isn't it? Like,
Yeah.
before films existed and before things, like, for an entire room to be able to hear something, it's so brilliant. Isn't it? I think it's
Yeah, the Scottish travellers have this idea of what they call the Misey. You're probably familiar with that, Alasdair. It's almost a kind of supernatural effect of ballads, big ballads in particular, when they're just sung in exactly the right way, with the right audience as well. That the audience is part of that ambience.
Yeah, I remember Stanley Robertson talking about that. I went to a workshop that he did once, and he was talking about that.
Yeah, but I suppose that the word's kind of related to the idea of the muse, isn't it? So it's elusive. It doesn't always appear, but when it does, it's you don't forget it. It's almost a sort of visceral, physical reaction.
Yeah, that concept and things like the cognac as well. The other one always makes me think of Duende and Lorca and his writings on sort of Cante Hondo in Spain, and that just this kind of like magical spirit, like muse-like spirit of the music that happens when the singing and the listening and the whole situation is complete, and
Yeah, doesn't happen very often.
Yeah.
So, should we attempt to raise the Mizey?
Sure.
Yeah, why not? We've summoned it into the room hopefully by now. So
Should I go first this time?
yeah, why not?
Okay. How's my sound? Does it sound okay? Is
Yeah.
it too quiet or too loud or?
Sounds really good.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah.
Well, I'm gonna try and sing an Irish song. I don't have a drop of Irish blood in me, I don't think, but I'll go for it anyway. I think I read something actually, Brían, that you maybe you knew something about the writer of the song. It's Ethna Carberry.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, did I read somewhere that you recorded a song that she'd written or?
Diarmaid did there recently. There's a version of More Like Mary that she wrote.
Right, okay.
That yeah, she was a revolutionary poet, right?
Yeah, I mean, I didn't really manage to find out that much about her. Apart from that, I heard this recording of this song sung by Bridget Tunney, a great singer from Fermanagh, I think.
Yeah. Paddy Tony's mother.
Paddy Tunney's mother, that's right. The song's called The Heathery Hills, and I found a reference to this one collection that Ethna Carberry published, but I think that was a nom de plume. I don't think that was her real name. I can't remember what her real name was. But this is The Heathery Hills. Just a beautiful kind of. It's very kind of. It's romantic kind of. And it's like a pastoral. It's very romantic, nostalgic longing for the home place in the country. I mind it still, and I see it yet in a halo of sunset glory, when I climbed knee deep in gorse and fern to keep my tryst with Rory. Like a singing flame, the little red lark poured the joy of his heart above me. But my grief for the heathery hills and the land that used to love me. The blue mist eerily drifted down till the kine were lost in shadow. It was time for Rory to come this way by Boreen and Dewy meadow. Then a song that was sweeter far than thrush or lark rose near me. I'm thinking long of the heathery hills and the land that used to cheer me. I miss my mother the livelong day. Should I was my mother's treasure. I sigh in dreams for my father's fields, and the city holds no would part its ease and its golden store, though wise folk may deride me for a summer's eve in the heathery hills, and the lad o' my heart beside me.
Words. It's great.
Thank you.
Yeah, God, great singing. I might sing one with the guitar while it's there sitting behind me, as you said. The Can you hear me okay? Is it all? Does it sound okay?
Yeah, actually, I have to say, I thought it was maybe a bit hot before. The first song was a little bit loud, but just a wee bit, like maybe even just moving away from the microphone a little bit would help. No.
Cool.
I don't know if Dave, you thought that as well, or?
Well, I'm going to sing a song that I learned from a recording of a singer that was recorded out on Ironmore, which is where my family are from and where my parents and my sister and her family and kids and all are still. So it's Rocherua was the name of the singer. She's somebody I've learned a lot of songs from, and I would have spent. I was very good friends with somebody who knew her very well, who only passed away just before Christmas, and I kind of, so over the years I kind of would have learnt a lot about this singer from her recordings and from one of my sisters who did a lot of work on her songs, and then from people on the island too. So there's quite a few of her songs floating around that were never recorded. So there are a few that I've kind of learned from local singers too, but this one was recorded. Only 3 verses of it, but I think it's really gorgeous. It's in the Irish language, so I'll explain maybe what's going on. It's kind of a classic old Irish romantic song. These were kind of like, like really floral poems of the kind of 18th and 19th century, and often people would actually know the context of a story. They would know the backstory to a song, and before they heard the song, and the song would only really just paint little scenes, only little small vignettes of a story. But this one really follows the kind of all the tropes of the romantic songs of that kind of era. So the first line is, or in the first verse, the protagonist tells his love, Myra Wan, or like White Mary, that he wouldn't even ask for any cows with her, that he loves her that much. He loves her more than cows. And then he gets in the middle of the second verse, he's lost in a foggy place, looking for her to help him. And then by the end of the song, he's sick, he's dying, and wants her to come and tend to him. So kind of this pathetic romantic character who isn't overly concerned with cows, but the last line of the verses is Taim sin ra le Myra Wan is níl cas ar bíd on, which means I'm in love with Myra Wan, but there's no hope for me, basically. here hingen Aranya this parchin Ryan fly his Shania the major Dugawa Near hing bona sprayla Achmala Harfui the Quim Oh Martin Shingre My rowan sneak castle be the one Oh, I one hashke so I one star Magica hose yomse Fried chidri can Where hinger quiet morgens ahoy sus the tree Oh merting hen the Goliath war the cow Valim at the of here ye have Marine bro to chin This year from age and then your dog and dog succeed McCann That meal to fire and rally Got a black nag take on king Oh, my time shingre the my rowan sneak castle be the one My time shingre the my rowan sneak castle be the one
Beautiful.
Lovely guitar as well.
Yeah.
Yeah, thanks. There's a place I mentioned in the first verse of that song that I don't know if it's the actual same place, but I know that in Silence, in that Pat Collins film Silence, he tries to record the silence in Mullaghmore, in a place called Mullaghmore. And there's loads of Mullaghmores all over the place, but anyway. Parchin, the first line is Hulheng Elian Aran Yat. I'd walk the island of Aran with you, and it's Parchin Mullaghmore and part of Mullaghmore. So
I should have mentioned earlier that if anybody watching wants to pitch in a question, just pop it into the chat, and we'll pass that on to the guys. I was just thinking there that that song, it's what every woman wants to hear, isn't it? I love you more than cows.
I'm just waiting for Hallmark to jump on that one now for Valentine's Day. I love you even without cows,
Yeah. There was something that struck me, and again, just reading bits of your blog, Brían, about your adventures on Aaron Moore, and also referring back to what you were saying about people singing in a room. This idea of the kind of cultural capital that having a good song would earn you. That. And I really love that idea of people having maybe one or two songs that they sing really, really well, and that's actually probably as important as having a huge repertoire of songs, and in fact, can get you a certain amount of social cachet.
Oh yeah, I know singers like that. You're like they'll walk into the room and you'll be like, "Oh, there's so and so. He's the one that sings, or she's the one that sings that song,"
Yeah,
and you're like, "I hope they sing that song tonight." Yeah,
totally. And
yeah,
I've even seen it happen. Like my uncles used to try and wind up my granddad because my granddad had like a couple of songs that he sang all the time that were like his favorite ones, and they'd be trying to get other people in the session to sing his songs before him, just to like wind him up as well. And those people own those songs in a way, like you can never sing those songs around them, like
yeah, totally. Yeah,
it's. I think there are people I've heard who have like one song that like they are a true master of. They know that song so well that it's like it's an amazing piece of art to witness when you do get to hear it, and that might be it for them. That might be the only one that they have, and the only
yeah,
one that they've really just gotten their teeth into. And I think that's amazing. It's
yeah.
because it gives people that moment of excellence and that moment of attention, and
Mm.
you know,
Yeah.
They might be on their gravestone. So and so, singer of such and such song.
yeah,
Yeah. Yeah, that's something that Henry Glassy talks about in the film that's part of this series. This idea of excellence being
Oh yeah,
being a a product of depth rather than width, if you like, and something that again often it isn't appreciated with so-called folk art, that the people who practice that are just as likely to be aiming for excellence in what they do as anybody else.
I think it's an amazing thing. Actually, I thought I was really moved by that Henry Glassy film and by some of the things that he said and his approach to his work. One of the things that really struck me was that thing that he trusts in the fact that he'll walk into an area, get chatting to people, and find somebody who does something amazing. And just to look for the amazing thing that people do rather than having this preconceived notion of looking for a particular thing uh, is such a valuable thing to have, because I think of like, people who went recording songs back in the 30s, 40s, and 50s and 60s and stuff all around Ireland who might have come to an island like Moor with this notion of like, oh, I'm looking for this kind of thing.
yeah,
It's this very specific kind of song that they're looking for. And as soon as they come into the area, they have this air of authority about them, and this people were intimidated by them in the community on Moor, at least. And it was this thing of like, oh no, she's the singer. Don't listen to me. I'm nothing. But the person who'd be saying that might have been an incredible singer themselves, but they didn't. There was no definition on what a traditional song was back then, or whatever.
yeah.
Um,
Those people kind of defined what the tradition was. They kind of shaped the canon of traditional song in a way by admitting certain things and not admitting other things. Yeah, I think
Yeah.
it's important to be kind of very open if you're going to be doing that kind of collecting work. I don't have much experience of it personally, but
yeah,
yeah,
there's definitely like I've seen certainly on Moor a lot of like singers. There's like two singers that spring to mind that both of whom passed away in the past couple of years, but who were like great friends of my family and who I'd been listening to singing forever. And I never really considered them as traditional singers because they wouldn't have said that they sang traditional songs. Because I always heard them accompanied with a guitar and it sounded like country music.
yeah,
And singing a bit of Johnny Cash and a bit of like some American country song and a bit of whatever. It was completely inclusive. It didn't have a border put on it of like, oh no, that's not traditional Irish. But like some of the songs that they sang were unrecorded, super old, amazing versions of traditional songs. And they wouldn't have called them that. But I think it's pretty amazing and that's why I was totally inspired by Henry Glassy actually in his thing. He seemed like such an incredible, seems like such an incredible man. To have
Well,
that.
the classic example of that is Jeannie Robertson. who had a whole repertoire of songs by Jimmy Reed, the singing brakeman from the 1930s, and Harry Lauder as well, that were never recorded.
Yeah.
And I think now that we tend to have a much more open or even sort of syncretic view, to use Alasdair's word, that we would love to have heard them,
Yeah.
and what's been denied there is a really rounded sense of these folk as singers and as entertainers in their social circle.
Yeah.
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 Yeah, it's interesting. It makes me think of that thing. There's an article about Jeannie Robertson's singing and the kind of development of her style over the years, from when she was first kind of recognised as a singer by people like Hamish Henderson, and then it was kind of analysing one of her most well-known songs, "Son David" or "My Son David," and how her performance of it changed so dramatically over the years as she rose in prominence and became celebrated for her singing. It became, whereas previously she kind of sung it in quite a jaunty kind of pace, and it lasted about 2 minutes. It's a relatively short song, really, and then by towards the end of her career, she was drawing out to like 6 minutes or so, and really kind of milking the kind of drama and the pathos of it in a way.
That's brilliant.
Yeah,
Yeah.
Well,
such a great singer.
Interrupt our audience.
I heard, actually, I've met a couple of people who knew Jeannie really well, who told me, I'm sure you guys know too, but who told me all kinds of stories about how she had loads of really filthy songs that were never recorded. Like, and they're really funny. Like, there's loads of them that are just like really short, really silly, funny songs. But like,
Yeah,
maybe I think it's people like Jeannie Robertson, and I hear the same thing when I hear like Rosh Arua as well. And I love how they were just like, they were really like women just being themselves and like head back, full on strong singing and taking control of the space, And it was it was a pretty unusual thing back then, wasn't it? Like, when you think of all these collectors even who were recording them, most of them were men, and it was very much a gate kept by men and what they thought was proper. So for a woman to be singing a bunch of really filthy songs, it's like, Jesus, no.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. Although I think Hamish Henderson, I think he was quite interested in the sort of body side of, the kind of racier side, the three de blue in Scottish kind of traditional culture. So he would probably, maybe he would known about that, but then there was probably also the pressure to kind of like kind of frame Jeannie as like, the kind of inheritor and bearer of this kind of almost sacred tradition of great kind of seriousness and profundity, and that like the big ballads were where that lay, so the focus became on the big ballads rather than the kind of the body songs,
Yeah.
which are just as valid a part of human experience as the big serious hefty ballads.
Totally.
Yeah.
And I think humor is such a valid part of human experience, just in general, like
Yeah.
the portrayal of those people as humans, as like real funny, kind, like, kind, funny, generous, good crack, all of the things that like made them charismatic and things that you often, they get kind of canonized, don't they, these people?
Yeah, I mean, I was kind of thinking, it relates to Pat Collins and his film Song of Granite, a kind of biopic about Joe Heaney, great Connemara singer, and I wondered if there could be an equivalent Scottish character that there could be a film made about, and maybe Jeannie Robertson would be the perfect character for the subject for a Scottish folk biopic.
Norman Kennedy would be an amazing subject for
Oh
a
yeah,
biopic. Yeah, if you know him,
yeah,
he's lived quite
I
a.
met him a couple of years
yeah. Norman Kennedy's
ago.
great. I kind of feel like he's a bit underappreciated in Scotland.
He
That's
is.
probably why I think he felt that himself, and that's why he moved to Vermont.
Right. I guess I met him a couple of years ago in Canada and had a couple of amazing days. We were out in Cape Breton singing at a festival there, and we shared a lift
with Norman back to the airport. It was like 5 hours or something. And it just went like that. It was incredible. It went so quickly. He's just an incredible man.
Yeah.
I think, yeah, I guess he knew Joe Heaney as well, didn't he? He talked a bit about him and stuff.
Right.
Like, God, it was just, he's an incredible guy. And am I right in saying that did he move abroad because he was gay? Was that part of it as well?
I think the story goes that he went to the Newport Folk Festival in 1965, and I think he got a sense of freedom in the States, or particularly maybe in the sort of folk milieu in the States that he just couldn't get at home at all.
Right.
And that was part of the reason that he decided to move over, I think.
Yeah, I never really considered sexuality. I didn't even know anything about his sexuality, and it's not really relevant to me. But I interviewed him a few years ago, actually, for something that never came to fruition, just down the phone to Vermont, and yeah, he said some quite interesting things. You know, at one point I made the mistake of referring to him as an artist, and he was like, "Oh no, son, I'm no art. I'm just a singer and a weaver." And then he insisted that I used the word Scots, and he told me off for that as well. He's like, "Oh no, it's Scotch. Scotch is the old way of saying it.
That's good.
Scots. It's just newfangled nonsense."
That's hilarious.
Yeah.
Yeah, he had that, he has that thing of I've found in a few tradition bearers like Stanley Robertson was the same, that they can actually be really quite prescriptive about what is the right way of doing it, you know. Because I would frequently hear Stanley saying, "Oh, she hasn't got the right way of it."
Yeah. I think even the Stewarts, you know, you hear about Sheila Stewart saying that her mother Bella was kind of like standing behind her to make sure that she sang the songs properly, you know.
And Thomas McCarthy, I don't know if you guys know Thomas.
Yeah.
Thomas was taught very prescriptively by his mother. Like, you'd say that she taught them she pulled them up on a word if they weren't singing it right. You know, she'd say, "Go back and sing that bit again." Like,
right.
It's funny. It goes against the folk tradition. It's very much like the opposite of the folk process kind of thing of just like hearing somebody singing it and picking it up and misremembering it kind of thing, isn't it? It's very different.
Maybe it's like there's kind of two traditions working in tandem, and they both kind of rely on each other or something. They find a balance between the very prescriptive and then the more kind of organic development.
Yeah, which kind of takes us back to our previous discussion about interpretation as against that kind of prescription.
Yeah. Although I don't think that you know, for example, Sheila Stewart was trying to imitate her mother. You know, obviously there's some similarities in their singing, but there's also kind of, to my ears, kind of quite considerable differences as well. I mean, you can kind of tell that they're related, but their styles are quite different. So it's like Sheila went through this prescriptive process in the process of discovering her own voice, in a way.
Yeah, it's like that old jazz thing of imitate, assimilate, innovate.
Right.
So maybe there's a bit of that going on.
Yeah, maybe there's too many chords for me, but yeah. I mean, I love listening to jazz, but I don't think I'm the man to play it.
Yeah.
It sounds like you guys ever read that book, The Singer of Tales? You know that book?
Oh, I've got that book actually. I found it quite heavy going.
Albert Lord. Yeah, a lot of it is pretty heavy, but then there's bits of it that are really amazing, you know.
Yeah.
And it was made into a film as well.
Okay.
But yeah, that was his kind of idea of it as well, wasn't it? It was kind of like assimilate, imitate, like actually kind of improvise. His kind of idea, isn't it, that people just improvise songs every time they sing them, like each performance.
Like from a built-up kind of stock of language. It's kind of about epic poetry in the Caucasus and stuff, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. amazing idea. But I think it relates. I think it can definitely relate to the Irish singing and to culture in Ireland anyway that I've witnessed. Yeah, it makes
Yeah.
sense to me anyway. Yeah, to hear it.
Yeah.
Gentlemen, is the time's wearing on, so I'm wondering if we should maybe conclude the proceedings, maybe with another song each.
Okay.
Just to see us out. Brían, do you want to go this time?
Yeah, for sure. Wondering what song to sing. There's a song that I just recently kind of pieced together that I could sing for you. It mentions Newfoundland in it as well. And talking about Norman kind of got me thinking about it as well. So since that was where I met him. But
I actually watched a documentary on YouTube the other night about Irish in Newfoundland. If you just Google Irish in Newfoundland, it'll come up, and it's a really interesting documentary. But apparently, the Irish in Newfoundland all come from a particular area around Waterford.
Loads of Powers probably.
I can't remember any of the surnames, but I would have remembered Power because of our mutual friend Bridget Power.
Well, this is a song that the singer that I heard this from was out on Iron Moor, and her name's Madge Green. Madge died a couple of years ago, actually, but she would have been she was a great character and just a vibrant, like full of life, full of crack, right up until the end, and she was a great lady. And she knew Rocha Rua, this singer that was recorded on the island back in the 50s. And Madge is one of the people that told me that she remembers Rocha's repertoire being so completely different. She remembers Rocha singing songs in English, mostly songs in English, and she just had a completely different notion of it to what was recorded, I suppose. And this is one song that she remembered from Rocha as a young girl. So I managed to piece it together with the help of Len Graham and some other manuscripts and sources that we managed to find between us. One of them being a recording of Joe Heaney, actually, singing a couple of verses of it, and then a manuscript I found from Cape Cod. So there's a bunch of different bits to it here, but it's a song called The Harp Without the Crown. And it's definitely a very much stuck in time song. It's a particular period, about 200 years ago, that this song was written and sung, I think. Anyway, the kind of the song is called The Harp Without the Crown, which was the name of the flag that they had back in the 18th century in Ireland, which was just a harp. And there's a couple of things mentioned in it that I think are cool. One of them is the North Kish Light, which is a lighthouse on the way into Dublin. So anyway. On the 17th of February, our gallant ship set sail. Down Lough-Foyle and away she went with the smooth and pleasant gale. Down Lough-Foyle and away she went with a smooth and pleasant sound. And the colour that she wore on her main topmast was the harp without the crown. Well, the Thomas O'Brien was her good ship's name, from Dublin town she came. Commanded by an Irish lad, Tom Russell was his name. He was born and raised in the Lurties, in the heart of Dublin town. And the flag that he flew from his main topmast was the harp without the crown. So hurrah, boys, hurrah,
for the girls of Dublin town. Hurrah, for the bonny green flag and the heart without the crown. When we landed on Newfoundland's banks, the weather it being grand, the captain called all hands on board and gave them his command. The captain called all hands on board, and to them we did say, we are not allowed to wear it on the shores of America. So hurrah, boys, hurrah, for the girls of Dublin town. And hurrah, for the bonny green flag and the heart without the crown. We will not take down our green flag, to the captain we did say. Our ship she's well married and we'll wear it all the way. Our ship she's well married and we'll wear it to the strand. For we're not afraid to wear it on the shores of Newfoundland. So hurrah, boys, hurrah, for the girls of Dublin town. And hurrah, for the bonny green flag and the heart without the crown. And it soon we were in the Channel, boys, the lovely sights to see. The Wicklow hills and the Wexford dells brought memories to me. And soon abeam the North Kish light, we can clearly see the town, where the girls will shout, here comes our ship, and the heart without the crown. So hurrah, boys, hurrah, for the girls of Dublin town. And hurrah, for the bonny green flag and the heart without the crown. So hurrah, boys, hurrah, for the girls of Dublin town. And hurrah, for the bonny green flag and the heart without the crown.
That's great. Have you recorded that?
No.
You should.
Yeah, I might. Yeah, I might do. I guess. Yeah, it's definitely it's one I feel very to be very careful with it or something, because it's like, I don't know. Yeah, because it was only a piece of something that that somebody that I knew sang. You know what I mean? It was definitely something that she was looking after.
Right. Yeah.
The song that needs looking after, I think. Yeah, no, I
sounds
will.
like,
Yeah.
sounds like you're looking after it just fine. I'll sing a song now. This is a song called Common Clay, which I wrote and is on an album called The Fiery Margin, which came out a few years ago. I don't play this one very often, and it's quite a jazz chord based, so bear with me. Why'd you make me? Why create me? Said gargoyle to mason. Why'd you mold me and shape me from this common stone? For to stand in gay relation to the glum congregation, and to face them with patience through eons alone. Sunday morning you will be at ease, they'll all assemble on their knees, for to murmur idle pieties in uniform drone. Though the stars in the heavens ever glimmer with indifference, I will never lose my reverence for this common stone. Why'd you make me? Why create me? Said man to his crafter. Why'd you mold me and shape me from this common clay? For to stand in sharp contrast to the arrogance and bombast of the wooden and the one cast of this mystery play. When you swagger in your larval mask, your ragged old iconoclast, they will pass around the brandy cask and drive you away. Though the stars in the heavens ever glimmer with indifference, I will never lose my reverence for this common clay. In this cold stone, crude and deformed, wonders have grown, wonders have grown. In this cold clay, lumpen and grey, God is at play, God is at play. In this cold stone, crude and deformed, wonders have grown, wonders have grown. In this cold clay, crude and deformed, God is at play, God is at play. Hear the world's eternal roundabout grind, grind a million voices out. Hear the world's eternal roundabout grind, grind, grind away. Hear the world's eternal roundabout grind, grind a billion voices out. Hear the world's eternal roundabout grind, grind, grind away. Thanks. It's a little bit rough,
Oh,
rough
great.
and ready, but you know, a bit out of practice.
There we are.
It's been a long year and a half or whatever.
Yeah, yeah. I was going to ask you both that just before we wrapped up. If you get any gigs in the diary?
Very few, I guess, on this side of the water. But I'm going to be me and my brother are going to be making a trip kind of all around the Irish Midlands very soon on a barge. We're taking a barge all over the Midlands, and playing a bunch of free gigs and just kind of hosting a bunch of events that people can wander along to in remote locations along the rivers and canals. So that'll be the kind of whole month of August and a bit of September, more or less. So
Wow, that's great. Yeah.
keep an
Lovely.
eye out anyway. We'll make a big noise about it. So
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, this past year and a bit, I've done a few things online, and I've done a few in-person things as well. Most recent one was in early, early this month in London, but I'm kind of out of practice. But it's not really because of the pandemic or the lockdown. It's because of having a 14-month-old baby that takes up.
That would
He
do
takes
it.
up a lot of time, so definitely not playing and singing as much as I usually do.
Yeah.
But I've got some gigs in the diary as well.
Yeah. Well, thanks both very much for your songs tonight,
Thank
and thanks very much for that rich and hugely interesting conversation as well. So thanks to you, Brían Mac Gloinn and Alasdair Roberts.
Thank you.
Both very much, and I'll just hand you over to a final word from our sponsor.
Just to echo what David said there, it's just been such a treat just to kind of sit and eavesdrop on that conversation. So thank you both very much, both for sharing your thoughts and ideas, memories, but also some truly wonderful songs. So thank you both very much, and thank you very much to David for hosting, and thank you to those folks that are tuning in live. Lots of mentions there of kind of things that are going to be coming up in the Folk Film Gathering over the next couple of days. There was a number of mentions of Pat Collins's film Henry Glassy, Fieldwork, magnificent new documentary that Pat has made about the American folklorist Henry Glassy. That is streaming, folks, so you can watch it at any point over the next 8 days or so. Please do check it out. It's a magnificent film. And we have Pat Collins, the director himself, will be joining us for another similar conversation, just this time between two filmmakers. Pat will be in conversation with the Italian filmmaker Michelangelo Framartino about place in cinema, kind of something that's kind of common to them both. And yes, just remains to say thank you all very much once again. It's been a wonderful session. I've really enjoyed it. Thank you, Brían. Thank you, Alasdair. Thank you, David. One of the awful things about Zoom is just you hit the red button, that's it. There isn't a chance to kind of go and have a pint afterwards or kind of mill about in the corridor afterwards, which is one of the things that I greatly miss. But it's been wonderful sharing this experience with you all, even if we are kind of beaming in digitally. So yeah, thanks very much to everyone. Thanks for joining, and we hope we will see you all again, Brían and Alice are included, at some of the events later in the week. Thanks very much, folks. Have a good evening and a good weekend. Cheers. Bye-bye.
yeah.